Hey guys, this is Jon Blau with the Herald Times. I'm here with Jeremy Price after a 74-62 loss for IU to Purdue. I guess it's a question on what we want to talk about first. I mean, in terms of the game, kind of crushing. Halftime moment though, with Bob Knight returning to Assembly Hall was obviously warm and fuzzy, for everybody.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I guess if you want to start with the good news, you start with Bob Knight. Then we can get to the bad news, which is the actual game itself.
Right. So let's start with the good news. I mean, what does this mean? I mean, you'll obviously write a column about this, but what does this moment mean for the program? I think Archie Miller touched on it a little bit. It's like tying the past more tightly with the program's present and future. Obviously, this is a guy who said he was never going to come back.
Right.
And stayed away for 20 years, and things have thawed to the level where he feels okay coming back, and the fans were obviously really happy to see him. I mean, there's a Bobby chant. He was kind of pumping his fist, and I know he did a defense chant with the crowd, but I guess he was saying defense for a while, defense. Everybody was really into it. So I mean, that was a nice thing to happen. I guess.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a mixed bag in a lot of ways, because the truth is that this comes a bit late in all of this, because it felt like this should have happened sooner, but basically Knight wasn't going to let this happen sooner. And at this point, I mean, anybody watching knows that this was a older, more frail version of Bob Knight, and maybe some of the things that are going on with him are as part of what's led to this thaw. The fact that health-wise and just age-wise, he's gotten to the point that he's sort of willing to do this, where maybe he wasn't a few years ago for a variety of reasons. So that puts it both explains why this happened, which is a nice thing, I think, for the fans and for the program and for Knight, because it did kind of leave the whole estrangement thing, sort of left this cloud over the program. And basically, anytime a guy like Dick Vitale, who broadcast the game today, shows up, what's he talking about? He's talking about Bob Knight, and he's talking about they should get back together, and he's talking about they should name the court, even though the court already has a name, and things like that. And so it was just kind of this looming thing, and this sort of puts that aspect of things to bed, and now everybody can kind of move on, and there's no more, well, what about Bob Knight? And are they ever going to get back together? Are they ever going to reconcile? Is he ever going to come back to Bloomington? All these things that have gone on for the past 20 years kind of can be put finally on the back burner, and that's sort of the good side of that. You talked about the warm, fuzzy feelings, and I think it was mostly warm, fuzzy feelings. I think there are probably some people that still, just because of the way things happened and maybe the grudge that Knight has kept, is sort of, it's going to be almost impossible to sort of heal that wound to a certain degree, and that's kind of understandable, and that's going to be part of the deal. I can't say that everybody's all of a sudden one big happy family, but it's more of a cohesive part, and I think Knight's return is really about, first of all, the fans and the ex-players, because the ex-players have all these reunions and things, and it's sort of this weird thing where let's talk about our great team, but we really don't want to talk too much about Coach Knight because he's not here or whatever. And so now that's kind of in the past. Everybody's on the same page. He's been back. It's sort of like the Godfather giving his blessing that now it's okay. You guys are all good. Now we don't have to worry about anybody violating some sort of unwritten oath of loyalty or breaking some sort of confidence with Knight and those things. Now kind of this reunion has sort of melted all of that away. So I think there's a lot of complicated layers, as with most everything relating to Bob Knight, that is involved even in this reunion.
Right. And then again, the what was not contained within that halftime was kind of ugly for IU. Just the 12-0 slide going into halftime to trail by 9 points.
9 at the half.
Yeah. 37-28.
Yep.
Yeah. And then the second half just kind of continued, and they weren't able to fight back for a second there. They got 56-50.
But only after they got down 16 points.
After they only got down 16 points, and then Matt Harms has 2 buckets. One of them's an and one. And the place actually went pretty quiet for a second. And I think that was almost the realization of the fans, like, oh, man, this is going to happen.
Yeah.
And because this is a huge loss. The Big Ten has just been so difficult to win on the road, especially for IU. I mean, they look like such a worse team on the road. And they blew an opportunity at home. And now they only have one more home game before they have a stretch where it's 4 out of 5 on the road.
Right.
And that's kind of daunting considering how things have played out. So
it doesn't look good at all for this team right now. And that was probably the other part of the whole Bob Knight thing, is that you kind of have this past glory thing on display at halftime, and it only winds up contrasting with where the program's currently at, which is nowhere near those glory days. And I think that's what probably made it worse for people, especially in the second half, as Purdue's just burying Indiana. It's like they thought, all right, Knight's back, everything's hunky-dory, we're going to come back, we're going to win this game and really start a run to end the season, and none of that happened. And so you're just kind of left, I don't know, just sort of empty and confounded, I guess, by the current state of Indiana basketball.
Yeah, and obviously Archie Miller was asked a ton of questions about Bob Knight in the post-game press conference, and it was like, how'd you feel, reaction, all that. And, obviously he was happy for everybody that this did happen. But one of the questions he was then asked at the end is, what made Bob Knight's team so good, and what can you do to try to, recapture that a little bit? And he talked about execution and role definition. And, it seemed like Bob Knight's teams, like each player knew what their role was, and they executed it to perfection. And, the guys who were supposed to take the shots hit the shots, and the guys who were supposed to set the screens had the right screens and all of that. And this is just not a team right now. It seems like anybody really, seems to be executing their role.
They just don't execute on a consistent basis. You get 2 or 3 good possessions offensively. You might get 2 or 3 good possessions defensively, but this team just really struggles to maintain a level of consistency at either end of the floor. And so that's what leads to these offensive droughts, which obviously put them in a big hole. And then they go through what I would call defensive droughts, where they just can't get a stop. And they're not necessarily, I wouldn't say this is a terrible defensive team. And as frustrated as people get with the offense, there are times it's not a terrible offensive team. It's just prone to these droughts and these lapses at both ends of the floor, and when you combine those two, it just adds up to a really difficult thing for this team to overcome.
And they're just not good at the things that they used to be good at. They're just not getting to the free throw line. 11 to 14. It's an okay number. It's not really a number compared to what they were doing early in the season, where they were getting 30 trips to the free throw line. And then on the boards, they got beat for the second time in a row on the boards. It's not as substantial as the Ohio State game. It was 29-28, but you could still tell it was a sore point for Archie Miller that it happened again.
Yeah, and I think the other part of that, I think we talked about this a little bit a few weeks ago, but it was kind of, okay, these are Indiana's strengths. What's their counter? Do they have a counter when teams try to take these things away? Which obviously we're to the point in the season, you're well scouted. Teams know what you do. They know what you do well. If you can take away offensive rebounding and you can try and limit the post game for Indiana, then you're in a good position. And Indiana hasn't found, we said back then that, doesn't look like this team has a counter. That's proven out to be the case, and that's really the problem right now, is the best counter for this team has been the emergence of Jerome Hunter to a certain degree, but the fact that Devontae Green remains largely a shell of the Devontae Green that was here for Florida State, and the fact that you when on a day where you don't get much from Al Durham until late, I don't know what he finished with. 7 or something? 5. Okay, and all 5 of those were in the last 5 minutes, basically.
Well, it was Trace, actually. Trace was 2 of 7 from the floor, and then he hit a couple of shots, ended up 4 of 9.
Yeah, that too.
He didn't have that great of a day either, in some respects. And he's not the reason. He's not the guy you point at. I think, looking at, Devontae, he hits that 3 early. You're like, oh, man, maybe it's about to come. And he had the nice behind-the-back pass to Brace Thompson. If Brace had hit that 3, that would have been huge. But he did hit Jerome on a 3 once. And you're thinking, okay, and then he finishes 1 of 7.
Yeah.
1 of 4 from 3. So.
And another day where Indiana's guards got outplayed, and Purdue, you've got a couple of guys with Eric Hunter Jr. and Isaiah Thompson, some guys that are Indiana kids that maybe didn't get super strong looks from Indiana. I know they got some looks. There was, I know Crean was looking at Hunter a little bit back before all that happened and those things, but ultimately kids that it was kind of a question mark. Are these kids good enough to come to Indiana? Well, they're good enough to go to Purdue and beat Indiana, so that just adds to the sting a little bit for this team that continues to struggle with its guard play.
Yeah. So I guess we talked about the 2 segments, the good and the bad. Now it's Iowa on Thursday, and I mean, if this was must win,
because if this was a must win, then that one's a must win. Right?
Yeah, it just feels like for the rest of the season, it's just that they need to. Some really good things have to happen for this team for the rest of the year, which seem again is so difficult because it's going to be on the road.
Yeah.
But so they got to pull out a couple they are not expecting them to win.
Yeah, I mean you got to get a game like Iowa because that's obviously a high quality opponent. That would be, you could add that with Michigan State and Florida State as kind of the top wins on the resume this year. But that resume is looking very shaky right now. I would guess Indiana, if not completely out of the tournament, maybe last 4 in or something this week on most of the bracketology
I would say
projections.
I would say out.
Yeah.
But,
so I mean, it's things are getting dicey. You can't say this team's done because there's a lot of basketball left to play, but it's looking gloomy right now, no doubt.
Right. So I wish we could give you a more positive message, but that's what it feels like. So we'll be back on Thursday.
Thursday it is.
We'll see what happens. So thanks for listening. We'll see you guys.